Walk down any street on Earth right now, and you will pass thousands of faces. Different skin, different height, different eyes, but underneath all of it, every single person you see belongs to the exact same species. Homo sapiens, one kind of human, everywhere you look, on every continent, in every city, on every crowded train. We treat that as normal, as obvious, as if it could never have been any other way. It could have. For nearly the entire history of our genus, we were not the only humans on Earth, not even close. At one point, at least 6 different species of human beings were alive on this planet at the same time. Neanderthals ruled the ice-cracked forests of Europe. Denisovans moved through the mountains and steppes of Asia. A 3-foot-tall species nicknamed the Hobbits hunted pygmy elephants on a remote Indonesian island. They built fires. They raised children. They buried their dead with flowers and ochre. They were not animals waiting to be replaced. They were people. And then, one by one, in a blink of geological time, they were gone. Why did the Neanderthals disappear after almost 400,000 years of dominating an entire continent? Stop. Why did the hobbits of Flores Island vanish from the only home they had ever known? And the question that should genuinely unsettle you: was it an accident of climate and chance, or did we, Homo sapiens, walk into their world and end it? Today, we are opening the coldest case file in the history of our species. 6 suspects. 6 vanished nations of human beings. And 1 species left standing at the end of it: us. To understand why they disappeared, you first have to understand something that sounds almost backwards. We were not the first humans to leave Africa. Not even close. Homo erectus ost had already spread across Asia hundreds of thousands of years before we existed. Neanderthals had already carved out a home across Europe. Denisovans had already claimed a vast, largely unmapped territory stretching from Siberia toward the Pacific. When Homo sapiens finally packed up and walked out of our ancestral homeland roughly 70,000 years ago, we weren't discovering empty land. We were walking straight into somebody else's neighborhood. And that is exactly where this story turns dark. Narrator. Before we dig into how these species actually met their end, I want to ask you something. If you could bring one extinct human species back for a single day, Neanderthal, Denisovan, or the tiny hobbits of Flores, which one would you choose? And why? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to read them. And if stories like this, the deep, buried history of what it actually means to be human, are the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, in a good way, this channel is built for you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community of people who are just as obsessed with these questions as I am. We're not just watching human evolution from the outside here. We're trying to understand how we, specifically, have evolved into whatever it is we are now. All right. Case file open. Let's go back to the beginning of the end. Let's kill the cartoon first. The grunting, club-swinging caveman in your head, that is not a Neanderthal. That is a myth built by scientists who, for the first 100 years, simply didn't want to believe an extinct human could be our equal. Here is the truth. Neanderthals had brains that were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They were physically stronger, built low, and dense for conserving heat through brutal Ice Age winters. They controlled fire with total confidence. They made stone tools, precise enough to butcher a mammoth in under an hour. And they buried their dead. Not just discarded the bodies, buried them, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with tools laid carefully beside the corpse, as if preparing someone for a journey, at a site called Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq. Archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had lived with a withered, useless arm, partial blindness, and crippling arthritis for years. In a world with no hospitals, no antibiotics, and constant physical danger, a disabled man does not survive alone. Somebody fed him. Somebody protected him. Somebody, 4 decades before Homo sapiens ever set foot in that region, decided that his life was worth the trouble of saving. These were not primitive shadows of humanity. They were humanity, just a different branch of it. So what happened when we arrived? Narrator. The timing is almost too clean to be a coincidence. Neanderthals had survived in Europe for close to 400,000 years. Multiple ice ages, multiple climate collapses, all of it. Then Homo sapiens arrives in large numbers around 45,000 years ago. Within about 5,000 years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, the Neanderthals are gone. Was it a war? Almost certainly not in the way you're picturing. There is no mass grave of slaughtered Neanderthals, no ancient battlefield littered with 2 different kinds of skulls. The extinction looks less like a massacre and more like a slow eviction. We were, by most of the evidence, better at long-range hunting, throwing spears, and eventually early projectile weapons that let us kill large animals from a distance instead of wrestling them at close range. We built wider, more connected social networks, trading tools and information across hundreds of kilometers. When 2 closely related populations compete for the exact same food, the exact same caves, and the exact same river valleys, ecologists have a blunt term for what happens next: competitive exclusion. One side simply gets pushed to the margins, generation after generation, until there isn't enough territory left to sustain a stable population. Climate made it worse. Europe, during this period, was swinging through violent temperature shifts, and every swing shrank the usable land a little further. A Neanderthal population that had weathered a dozen ice ages alone suddenly had to weather one more. With a highly organized, highly as adaptable, rival species pressing in on every side at the same time. But here is the twist that most documentaries skip past. And it's the one that actually changes the entire meaning of this story. We didn't just replace the Neanderthals. We merged with them. If you are of European or Asian descent, somewhere between 1 and 4% of the DNA sitting inside every cell in your body right now is Neanderthal. Not metaphorically. Literally. There was a period, however long, however uneasy, when modern humans and Neanderthals were not just fighting over the same hunting grounds. They were having children together. Real families. Made of 2 different human species, raising kids who were biologically something in between. Some of that inherited Neanderthal DNA still does real work in your body today. Genes tied to immune response, to skin and hair, even genes that may have helped early modern humans adapt to cold European winters faster than evolution alone could have managed. The Neanderthals didn't just vanish, Pieces of them were absorbed into the winning side. They are, quite literally, inside you. Extinction, it turns out, is rarely as clean as the word suggests. If the Neanderthals are the famous extinct cousin, the Denisovans are the one nobody remembers the name of. And that's genuinely strange, because in some ways their story is even wilder. We don't have a Denisovan skeleton. We don't even have a Denisovan skull. Everything we know about this entire species comes from a handful of fragments found in a Siberian cave, a finger bone, a few teeth, a jaw discovered halfway around the world on the Tibetan Plateau, and from the DNA they left scattered across living human populations. An entire branch of humanity, reconstructed almost entirely from genetic ghosts. And those ghosts left behind something remarkable. High in the mountains of Tibet, where the air holds roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. Modern humans carry a gene variant that lets their bodies process that thin air far more efficiently than populations at low altitude. That gene did not evolve in Homo sapiens. It came from the Denisovans. Tens of thousands of years after the species itself disappeared, their genetic gift is still keeping people alive on the roof of the world. Now travel south to the islands of what is today Indonesia for one of the strangest chapters in this entire investigation. In 2003, on the island of Flores, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a species that shouldn't have made sense. An adult human standing barely a meter tall, with a brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, and yet surrounded by sophisticated stone tools and evidence that this tiny species was actively hunting pygmy elephants. Scientists nicknamed them hobbits, and the name stuck because there was genuinely nothing else to compare them to. How do you end up with a species like that? The answer is a phenomenon called island dwarfism. When a population of large animals, including, apparently, an early human ancestor, becomes isolated on a small island with limited food and no major predators, something strange happens over tens of thousands of years. The biggest bodies, the ones that need the most calories to survive, are selected against. Generation after generation, the population shrinks, while other, smaller creatures on the same island, rats, for instance, sometimes grow larger in the absence of competition. Islands are evolutionary pressure cookers, and Flores produced one of the strangest results anywhere on Earth. An entire species of tiny, tool-making, elephant-hunting humans. They survived in near total isolation for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, somewhere around 50,000 years ago, suspiciously close to the time, modern humans are believed to have reached the region. They disappear from the fossil record entirely. Some researchers point to a nearby volcanic eruption as the final blow to an already fragile, isolated population. Others suspect the same story we just told about the Neanderthals, played out on a much smaller stage. A tiny population, already living on the edge, simply couldn't compete once a smarter, more adaptable rival arrived on their island. Either way, an entire species that had quietly survived longer than Homo sapiens has currently existed was erased within what may have been a few thousand years of our arrival. Here is the question that should actually bother you. If Neanderthals were physically stronger, and their brains were, on average, just as large as ours, sometimes larger, why did we win and they didn't? It wasn't muscle. It wasn't raw brain power, at least not in the simple sense of brain size. The leading theory is something far stranger and far more powerful. The cognitive revolution, somewhere around 50 to 70,000 years ago, something shifted in how Homo sapiens used language and imagination. The archaeological record practically erupts with new behavior almost overnight. In evolutionary terms, cave paintings, carved figurines, bone flutes, jewelry made from shells traded hundreds of kilometers from where they were found, tools crafted with a level of planning that implies someone was thinking several steps ahead. The theory is that our language crossed a threshold into full recursive structure, the ability to build sentences inside sentences, to describe things that don't exist, to imagine a future that hasn't happened yet and explain it clearly enough that someone else could picture it too. Once you can do that, everything changes. A hunting party isn't just reacting to where the herd is right now. It's coordinating a plan based on where the herd will be tomorrow, based on patterns observed over years. A tribe isn't just 15 relatives anymore. It's dozens of unrelated strangers, bound together by a shared story, a shared belief, a shared myth about who they are and what they owe each other. That is the real secret weapon, not muscle, not even raw intelligence. The ability to cooperate at scale, stop, with people you've never met, because you both believe in the same invisible idea. And once a species can do that, the numbers stop being fair. Up. While a Neanderthal band might have operated in a tight, self-sufficient group of 15 to 20, early Homo sapiens networks could apparently mobilize alliances of 100 or more, trading resources and information across vast distances. In a direct competition for the same rivers, the same caves, the same herds of game, that kind of organizational advantage compounds. It doesn't need a single battle. It just needs to tip the odds a little further, in one direction, every single season for thousands of years in a row. This is competitive exclusion again, but now you can see the actual mechanism behind it. Two species eating the same food in the same territory cannot coexist forever. One side out-organizes, out-trades, and out-hunts the other. And the loser doesn't get killed in some dramatic final stand. The loser simply starts having fewer surviving children each generation, until one day there are none left at all. This is the part of the story nobody gets to see, because nobody was there to record it, and there was no dramatic final battle to leave behind. The end of the Neanderthals did not happen in a single catastrophic event. It happened in whispers, spread across thousands of years and thousands of small, unremarkable defeats. A slightly harder winter than usual. A hunting ground that, this year, had a Homo sapiens camp already sitting in the best spot. A birth rate that dipped just slightly below what the population needed to sustain itself year after year until the math simply stopped working. By roughly 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone from the fossil record. The Denisovans faded out around the same broad window. The hobbits of Flores held on a little longer in their isolated island world before they too disappeared. Homo naledi, a small-brained species in South Africa that was somehow already burying its dead in deep, difficult-to-reach caves, vanished into a timeline we still don't fully understand. And by roughly 30,000 years ago, for the first time in the entire multi-million-year history of our genus, there was exactly one kind of human left standing on planet Earth. U.T's tempting to tell this story as a triumph. The clever species won. The others simply weren't built to last. But that's not really what the evidence says, and if we're being honest with ourselves, it isn't a very comfortable story at all. We weren't inevitable. For most of our history, we were just one experiment among several, one branch of the human family tree, competing against 5 or 6 others, any one of which might have been the one left standing instead of us. We happened to develop the right combination of language, cooperation, and timing in exactly the world that rewarded those specific advantages. Change a handful of variables, and this video might be narrated by someone else entirely, and they never really left completely. Look closely enough, and the Neanderthals are still there. In a gene that shapes your immune system. In a Denisovan variant quietly keeping people alive on a mountain in Tibet. In fragments scattered through the species that outlasted them. We didn't just win, we absorbed. So here's the uncomfortable question this story leaves behind. For the first time in our species' entire existence, we are completely alone. No competitors, no cousins. No other branch of humanity to check our advantages against. We are the last one standing, and we hold that position not because we were destined for it, but because a series of pressures, some of our own making, tipped the balance in our favor. What we do with that position, as the only humans left on a planet we now control almost entirely, is a question the Neanderthals never had to answer. They looked out at their world and had no reason to believe it wouldn't last forever. They had fire. They had community. They had 400,000 years of accumulated survival behind them. And then they didn't. If this journey into the lost branches of humanity got you thinking, make sure you're subscribed, because we go even deeper into these questions every week here on Half Evolved. Let me know down in the comments which vanished species fascinated you the most, and I'll see you in the next one.